Separate mixture. On the top one, element. What is an element? Elements means pure one form. Pure one form. So, like if you have a single atom, this is element. But also, when you have diatomic, also can be an element. For example, oxygen, O2, is an element, or hydrogen, H2. They are an element because they only have one form. And also element can be many. For example, a piece of pure iron. This is element too. Definition of elements means anything of pure one form. The next one, compound. What's meant by compound? Compound means something have more than one type. So that is, if there is two types combined, this is a compound. More than two or three types combined is a compound. For example, H2O is a compound. Mixture. What is a mixture? Mixture is more than one type. More than one type. As example in here, there is two types of element. It is a mixture. Of two types of a compound, or a two type or anything more than one type, that is a mixture. Now I'm going to talk about separating mixture. When a mixture in a liquid, because it has more than one type, and it's pretty difficult to separate because they all in liquid form. And we try to see if I can make this mixture to separate into one into liquid, but the other could be either solid or in another different type of liquid or in gas. So that to make it so in case if one is a liquid but the other is solid, then that will be easier to be separate. Now the point is we divide it into, if we separate into those big or small solid, or we separate into very fine molecule. In liquid state, if I can divide it into high or low density liquid, or in a gas, so long as I can separate this liquid into a different state of substance, then it will help me to separate more easily. And that's the point. And now we start with the solid. Imagine if you have two types of liquid, and say in the example of salty water, how you're going to separate it? Now that is NaCl and water. I can do it by evaporation. By evaporation, because once will be more easy to evaporate. So once they evaporate out, you're left with the solid crystal behind. So now once become solid, and I can separate a lot easier. Or I can do it by crystallization. Sometimes when you have two types of liquid mixed, but you still can separate because two substances may have different temperature. They have different temperature. For example, baking soda and salt. If you put a spoon of baking soda mixed with salt in water, and they mix very well, it's very hard to separate them. But that's one way. If these two, they both can dissolve in hot water, and then you start to cooling it down. And you find that baking soda are less soluble in cold water and then salty water. So once you lower the temperature, the baking soda will form into a solid, and it will crystallize into the solution. And now one remains as liquid, but the other is a solid. And now you can separate it a lot easier. Sedimentation. This is a very simple step. For example, soil mixed in water, in a muddy water. You just let it to settle. Leave it for a few days, as the picture shows. You leave it for a few days to settling down. The soil will settle down to the bottom. And on this three way, I try to make it into one liquid as into a solid state, so that I can separate. And once they become solid or small solid, now I can do my next step. I can either by decanting. What's mean by decanting? As I show on this picture, to pour it onto another jar, so the heavy substance will settle at the bottom. That is one way we call decanting. Or by filtration, put it through a filter paper and then let the solid be separate by the filter paper, and the liquid will remain soluble, and then this is the way we can separate. So this is the way we make one into liquid, but the other form into a solid state, so that I can separate. Now we're going to deal with something more fine particle. In case if the particles are very, very fine, there is one way called centrifuge. Centrifuge is by spinning action, under spinning at a very high speed. The particle will be separated by the heavier particle will be on one end, the lighter particle will onto the other end. So now this small particle, this fine particle can be separate. And this picture showing is a medical centrifuge. So by spinning action, the heavier substance will be on one part, the lighter substance will fall onto the other part and be separated. Chromatography. This is also to separate the fine particle. For example, dye or coloring. And say on this picture, you put onto a paper and you put one dot of particle of ink into a water. After an hour or so, you will find the ink will start to go up and it separate into a few different segments. And now why is like that? Because some substance will cling onto the paper more strongly. If they cling onto the paper more strongly, it can move up slow. But also you have some substance, they cling onto the paper very weakly. And then this type of substance, they move up a lot faster. So it turns out that a block of ink, it made of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different coloring to make up ink. So this way you can, by chromatography, paper chromatography, you can separate out of a color dye. Separating liquid. Now, early example we're talking about solid or fine particle. What happens if they are still remain as liquid? We can see based on its density may be different of two different liquids. For example, oil and water, they are under different density. So on this picture, in case this separating funnel, if there is a less dense particle like oil is lighter than water, it will flow onto the top. And the heavier substance like water will be at the bottom. So now it separates into two layers. And then you can use this way, and it can be open up the tap and to separate out two different liquids with different density. So you can separate the high density heavier substance liquid or low density lighter substance liquid like water and oil. Another way, if I can make this substance one instead in a liquid, but the other can turn into gas, then I also can separate. One good example, if I have ethanol alcohol, like the drinking wine, and I mix in water, so I have alcohol and water. How can they mix very well? How can I separate it? It can use by boiling point. So I heat up this solution, and if the temperature go to 78 degrees, that is the boiling point for alcohol. And now water remain, but the alcohol will evaporate. When it evaporates, it goes through the condenser and be separated out. So now this become the pure alcohol, and left behind will be the water. So you can see there is different way of separate mixture. Thank you.